I am Eleanor Wilson, 32 years old, and I always thought my father Thomas loved me more than anything in this world. After losing my mom young, it was just us against the world until he married Diana when I was 16. For years she showed one face to him and another to me. When Dad died last month, I expected the worst at the will reading. What I never expected was Diana standing up with that smug smile. "She gets nothing, I made sure of it," she announced triumphantly. Then something incredible happened. The lawyer Harold started laughing. If you are watching this video, drop a like, subscribe, and let me know where you are watching from, as I share how my world turned upside down. My childhood was forever changed when my mother lost her battle with aggressive breast cancer when I was 8 years old. The memory of that hospital room with its antiseptic smell and the steady beep of machines going silent still haunts me sometimes. But what followed was a beautiful, if bittersweet chapter with my father Thomas. He was devastated. We both were. But he channeled his grief into being both mother and father to me. Thomas Wilson was not wealthy when my mother died. He had a small cybersecurity consulting business that he ran from our modest 3-bedroom home in a quiet suburb of Chicago. I remember him working late into the night at our kitchen table, the blue light of his laptop illuminating his tired but determined face. "Eleanor Bear," he would say, using the nickname only he was allowed to use someday. "This will all be worth it." And it was. Over the next 8 years, Wilson Securities grew from a one-man operation to a $200 million enterprise with offices in 6 cities. Dad had identified a niche in security solutions for financial institutions just as digital banking was exploding. His patented encryption methods became the gold standard in the industry. Despite his growing success, Dad never changed who he was at heart. He drove the same car for years, kept our family home, rather than moving to some mansion, and made sure I understood the value of hard work. Starting when I was 14, I spent summers filing paperwork and answering phones at the main office. By 16, I was helping with basic coding projects and sitting in on some client meetings. "I want you to understand this business from the ground up," Dad would say. "Not because you have to take it over someday, but because understanding how things work gives you freedom to choose your own path." Everything changed the summer I turned 16. That was when Diana Blackwell walked into our lives. She was the office manager at Meridian Bank, one of Dad's biggest clients. I remember the first time she came to our home for dinner. She wore a navy blue dress that was professional, but somehow still showed off her figure, her dark blonde hair styled perfectly, not a strand out of place. "Your home is so charming, Thomas," she said, but I caught the slight curl of her lip as she examined our comfortable but ordinary living room, so full of character. To Dad, Diana was warm, attentive, and interested in everything he had to say. She laughed at his corny jokes and touched his arm in a way that made him stand taller. With me, though, things were different when Dad was not in the room. "Eleanor, dear," she said while helping me clear the dinner plates. That first night, her voice dropping its warmth. "Do not get any ideas about me trying to replace your mother. I am here for Thomas. You will be off to college soon enough, and we can maintain a cordial relationship until then." I was shocked by her bluntness, but managed to mumble, "I never thought you were trying to replace my mom." She gave me a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Good. That will make things easier." Diana began appearing at our house more frequently, always with some small gift for Dad, or a reason she needed his advice. Within 3 months, they were dating exclusively. Within 6, she had convinced him they should move in together. Her son Justin, who was 17 and a year older than me, came with the package deal. Our house transformed almost overnight. Diana redecorated room by room, replacing our comfortable lived-in furniture with sleek, expensive pieces. Family photos disappeared from walls, replaced by abstract art that elevated the space, according to Diana. The most painful change was when my mother's reading nook, preserved exactly as she had left it with her favorite books, and the quilt her grandmother had made, was converted into a home office for Diana. "We need to move forward, not live in a shrine," Diana told Dad when I protested. "Eleanor needs to accept that too." Dad, who had never fully recovered from losing Mom, seemed reinvigorated by Diana's attention. He lost weight, bought new clothes, and started coming home earlier from work. He was happier than I had seen him in years, and I tried to be happy for him, despite my growing discomfort with Diana. The wedding was a lavish affair at the Peninsula Hotel, with 300 guests, most of whom seemed to be business associates rather than friends. I stood beside Dad as his best woman, forcing a smile for photographs while Diana was walked down the aisle by Justin, her only family present. I left for Stanford 2 weeks later, earlier than planned for freshman orientation, but really to escape the tension at home. Diana had made it clear that my bedroom would be converted to a guest room, since you will only be visiting occasionally now. College gave me distance, but also perspective. I tried to maintain my relationship with Dad through weekly phone calls and visits during breaks, but Diana always seemed to have a way of interrupting our time together. She would schedule business dinners on the evenings I was home, or create last-minute weekend trips that Dad could not refuse. "Your father works so hard, Eleanor," she would say. "He deserves some relaxation. You understand, do not you?" Dad continued to support me financially through college, and beyond paying for my education, and helping with rent when I started working for an educational nonprofit after graduation. My career choice puzzled him initially. "With your skills you could be making 6 figures in tech," he said during one of our rare lunches alone. "I know, Dad, but money is not everything. I want to help make education accessible to kids who do not have the advantages I had." He smiled then, a genuine smile that reminded me of our life before Diana. "Your mother would be so proud of you. She always said you had her heart." That comment earned me a week of canceled phone calls when Diana overheard it. Justin, meanwhile, had taken a different path. Initially friendly toward me in a distant, awkward teenage boy way, he had accepted a position at Wilson Securities right out of his business degree. He had none of Dad's technical brilliance but compensated with a smooth salesman-like charm that won over clients. I sometimes wondered if he was more like his mother than either of them realized. 5 years into the marriage, the dynamics in our family had shifted dramatically. Diana had transformed from the charming, attentive partner who had won my father over to the undisputed controller of both our family and increasingly aspects of the business. The household staff, once long-term employees who had been with us since I was small, had been replaced one by one with Diana's choices. Maria, who had cooked for us since my mother was alive and knew exactly how to make the chicken soup that Dad loved when he was sick, was dismissed for unsanitary practices. The new chef came with impressive credentials but prepared only the Mediterranean diet meals that Diana insisted were necessary for Dad's health. My visits home became increasingly strained. Somehow Diana always seemed to schedule emergencies whenever I planned to come home. The pipe in the guest bathroom would mysteriously leak, requiring the room to be unusable. An important client would need emergency attention, sending Dad to another city. After several truncated or canceled visits, I began staying at hotels when I came to town, which Dad protested, but secretly made our time together more productive. "Why do not you stay at the house?" he would ask, genuine confusion in his eyes. "Diana says she always prepares your old room specially." "It is just easier this way, Dad," I would reply, not wanting to create more tension. "We can focus on spending time together instead of household logistics." Diana's spending had reached new heights. The modest family home had been sold, replaced by a mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. She drove a different luxury car every few months, explaining to Dad that image matters in your position. Her social media accounts, managed by a PR firm she had hired, showcased their extravagant lifestyle with carefully staged photos of charity galas and exotic vacations. Most concerning was Diana's increasing influence over the business. Justin had been promoted to Vice President of Client Relations, a position created specifically for him, despite complaints from more qualified employees. Dad's founding partner, Richard Taylor, called me with concerns. "Eleanor, I do not want to put you in an awkward position," Richard said during a discreet lunch meeting, "but things are changing at Wilson Securities in ways that worry me. Your father is making decisions that seem out of character. What kind of decisions? I asked, my stomach tightening. Restructuring. That puts Justin in charge of departments he has no experience managing. Redirecting resources from R&D to more visible but less substantial projects. And Diana seems to be sitting in on strategy meetings now. Did you know that? I did not. Each time I tried to discuss these concerns with Dad, he would brush them off with, "Everything is fine, Eleanor Bear. Business changes. We have to adapt." But it was not just the business that was changing. Dad himself seemed different. At 62, he had always been energetic and sharp, often outlasting employees half his age during crunch times. Now he seemed forgetful at times, tired and strangely dependent on Diana for basic decisions. Natalie Parker, my closest friend since college, who had met Dad many times over the years, noticed the change immediately when she joined us for dinner during one of my visits. "Is your dad okay?" she asked afterward as we drove back to my hotel. He kept looking at Diana before answering any question, even about his favorite baseball team. "I do not know," I admitted. Something feels off, but whenever I bring it up, Diana interrupts or Dad changes the subject. My worry turned to alarm when Grace Thompson, Dad's executive assistant for over a decade, contacted me privately. "Eleanor, I would not reach out if I was not truly concerned," Grace said, her voice hushed, even though we were speaking on her personal phone after hours. "Your father missed 3 important meetings last month because Diana scheduled doctor appointments at the same time. When I tried to reschedule the medical appointments, she accused me of trying to undermine her care of him." "What kind of doctor appointments?" I asked. "That is just it. She will not say," claiming privacy concerns. "And your father seems confused about them afterward. Also, she has been bringing documents for him to sign without allowing me or the legal team to review them first." This information spurred me to start investigating Diana more thoroughly. With help from Natalie, who worked in human resources and had connections in the corporate world, I began digging into Diana's background. What we discovered was troubling. Diana had been married twice before meeting my father, each time to wealthy men significantly older than herself. Both marriages had ended within 5 years. There were sealed court records associated with her second divorce that we could not access, but the timeline coincided with her sudden career change and move to our city. During this investigation, I also started dating Michael Barnes, an attorney specializing in estate planning, who I met through a nonprofit fundraiser. Initially, I was hesitant to mix my personal concerns with our relationship, but as things became more serious between us, I confided my worries about Dad and Diana. "From what you are describing," Michael said carefully, "there could be some financial manipulation happening. But without specific evidence, it is hard to determine if anything illegal is occurring. The most important thing is to document everything you observe or hear about." Following his advice, I began keeping detailed records of all interactions, changes in Dad's behavior, and business decisions that seemed unusual. I also reached out to some of Dad's oldest friends, many of whom confirmed they had been seeing less of him over the past year. "Thomas canceled our monthly golf games 6 months ago," said Frank Rodriguez, Dad's friend since college. "Said his doctor advised against it. But I saw him at the club restaurant with Diana, and some people I did not recognize, and he seemed surprised to see me, almost embarrassed." The picture forming was increasingly concerning. Diana appeared to be systematically isolating my father from his friends, loyal employees, and even me, while positioning Justin to take a larger role in the company. But without Dad acknowledging there was a problem, I felt powerless to intervene. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in April. I was preparing for a meeting with potential donors for our education program when my phone rang with Grace's number. "Eleanor," Grace said, her voice breaking. "Your father collapsed in the office this morning. They have taken him to Northwestern Memorial. Diana is with him, but I thought you should know immediately." I caught the first flight home, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. By the time I arrived at the hospital 6 hours later, Diana had already established herself as the gatekeeper to my father's room. A security guard stopped me outside his door. "I am sorry, miss, But Mrs. Wilson has limited visitors to immediate family only, he said, checking his list. I am Eleanor Wilson, Thomas Wilson's daughter, I replied, my voice rising. I am immediate family. The guard looked uncomfortable. I am sorry, but Mrs. Wilson specifically said no visitors until tomorrow. Doctor's orders. It took 3 hours, multiple conversations with hospital administrators, and finally the intervention of my father's primary doctor before I was allowed into his room. Diana was notably absent, having left for an important business matter according to the nurse. Dad looked small in the hospital bed attached to monitors and an IV. His face was ashen, and he had lost weight since I had last seen him 2 months earlier. When he opened his eyes and saw me, a weak smile formed. Eleanor Bear, he whispered, reaching for my hand. You came. Of course I came, Dad. What happened? What are the doctors saying? He closed his eyes briefly, and for a moment I feared he had lost consciousness. Then he spoke, his voice barely audible. Brain tumor. Aggressive. They are doing more tests. My world tilted on its axis. How long have you known? Suspected for a few weeks. Headaches, vision problems. Diana has been taking me to specialists. Why did not you tell me? I asked, fighting back tears. He squeezed my hand weakly. Did not want to worry you until we knew for sure. Diana thought it best. Then, with more clarity than he had shown so far, he added, Everything is arranged, Eleanor. Trust Harold. He knows. Before I could ask what he meant, the door opened, and Diana swept in her face, transforming from irritation to concerned devotion when she saw my father was awake. Thomas, darling, you need to rest, she said, moving to his side and effectively pushing me back. Eleanor, the doctor said 5 minutes maximum. You can come back tomorrow during regular visiting hours. I just got here, Diana. I flew across the country to see him. And I have been by his side non-stop, she replied, her voice taking on the martyred tone she had perfected. The doctors are very clear that he needs minimal stimulation. Perhaps you should focus on helping by keeping the business running smoothly. Justin is at the office now, coordinating with the executive team. The implication was clear. Justin was handling things I should be, but was not qualified to manage. It was a familiar tactic, but with my father lying there so vulnerable, I did not have the heart to fight. I will come back tomorrow, Dad, I said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. I love you. Love you too, Bear, he whispered before Diana adjusted his pillows, coincidentally blocking his view of me. The following weeks established a pattern. Dad was diagnosed with glioblastoma, an aggressive form of brain cancer. Diana established herself as his primary caregiver and medical decision-maker, scheduling treatments and consultations without informing me until afterward. When I researched experimental treatments at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York, Diana dismissed them as too experimental and not what Thomas wants. Access to my father became increasingly restricted. Diana implemented a visitor schedule that somehow always placed my allowed times during his treatments or when he was heavily medicated. Hospital staff, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge her, would suggest I try again tomorrow when I arrived, to find him unable to communicate. During one rare visit when I found him lucid and alone, I brought Michael to meet him. Dad seemed to rally, asking insightful questions about Michael's work and our relationship. He is a good man, Dad said to me when Michael stepped out to take a call. Reminds me of myself when I was younger. Smart but kind too. I think so too, I said, holding his increasingly frail hand. Eleanor, listen, Dad said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Diana is not who you think. Before he could continue, the door burst open and Diana stormed in, her face contorted with fury. Who authorized this visit? I specifically told the nurses no visitors during medication adjustments. She pressed the call button repeatedly. You need to leave immediately. You are upsetting your father. Diana, please, Dad began, but she cut him off. You are not thinking clearly, Thomas. The doctor said agitation could worsen your condition. She turned to me. Out. Now. Or, I will have security remove you. With Michael waiting outside and not wanting to stress Dad further, I reluctantly left, but not before noticing the defeated look in my father's eyes. 2 days later, Grace called me in tears. "Eleanor, your father has been moved to hospice care. Diana made the decision this morning. They are saying he has only weeks left." Weeks? But the doctors said months with the right treatment, I exclaimed, already grabbing my laptop to book a flight. I know. It does not make sense. And Eleanor, something else is happening. Diana brought in new lawyers yesterday. Not Harold Barnes, your father's attorney for 20 years. New people from a firm I do not recognize. They were having your father sign documents. My blood ran cold. What kind of documents? I do not know. When I asked, Diana had me removed from the room, said it was family business. "Eleanor, I think you need to get here as soon as possible." I flew back that night and went straight to the hospice facility. By some miracle, or perhaps because the hospice staff operated independently from the hospital where Diana had established her authority, I was allowed in to see Dad immediately. He was much worse than he had been just a week earlier. His breathing labored, and his once robust frame now skeletal. But when I took his hand, his eyes opened, and he recognized me. "Eleanor," he whispered, "time is short. Dad, please fight. There are other treatments we have not tried." He shook his head slightly. "Too late for that, but not too late for truth. Diana, she wants everything. Always has." "I know, Dad. I am going to fight for you." His eyes filled with tears. "Not for me. For you. For what is right. Promise me." "I promise," I said, my voice breaking. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength, then closed his eyes again. That was the last coherent conversation we had. 3 days later, while I was stuck in traffic, after Diana mistakenly gave me the wrong time for a schedule change, my father took his last breath, with only Diana at his side. The grief was overwhelming, but beneath it burned a determination. I would keep my promise. I would fight for what was right, whatever that turned out to be. The funeral Diana arranged for my father was a spectacle that bore little resemblance to the man he had been. The massive cathedral could seat 800, and every pew was filled mostly with business associates and social connections Diana had cultivated. Enormous floral arrangements costing more than what most people make in a month flanked the ornate casket that Dad, who had always preferred simplicity, would have hated. Diana positioned herself front and center, dressed in an impeccably tailored black Chanel suit, receiving condolences with practiced grace. Justin stood beside her, looking uncomfortable in his role as the son Thomas Wilson had never had but supposedly always wanted, according to Diana's comments to several executives. Thomas always said Justin was the son he never had. I overheard her telling the CEO of a major client company he was grooming him to take over the business. My blood boiled, but I maintained my composure. Dad had never said any such thing. In fact, he had specifically told me that Justin needed years more experience and maturity before he would be ready for serious leadership. When it came time for eulogies, Diana spoke first, delivering a polished speech about her beloved Thomas and their perfect partnership. She mentioned my mother only once, as Thomas's first wife, erasing 20 years of marriage and the great love of my father's life. My own eulogy focused on who Dad really was, his integrity, his quirky sense of humor, his dedication to building things that lasted, and his belief that wealth was a responsibility, not a privilege. I shared stories of him teaching me to fish patiently, explaining complex coding problems, and never missing a single school event, despite his busy schedule. My father built his business from nothing, because he believed in adding value to the world, I said, looking out at the sea of faces. But he measured his success not by his bank account but by the relationships he formed, and the positive impact he had on others' lives. I noticed several of Dad's oldest friends and colleagues, nodding in recognition, some wiping away tears. Diana, however, sat stone-faced, checking her watch as I spoke. Justin followed my eulogy with awkward remarks, focusing almost exclusively on Dad's business acumen and strategic vision for the future of Wilson Securities. The contrast between our remembrances could not have been more stark. At the reception following the service, I was approached by numerous colleagues and friends of my father, many of whom made cryptic comments that only later would make sense. Richard Taylor, Dad's founding partner, hugged me tight and whispered, "Your father was always 10 steps ahead of everyone else. Remember that in the days to come." Frank Rodriguez squeezed my shoulder and said Thomas made sure everything was in order before he left us. He never left anything to chance. Even Grace, who had maintained a professional distance during the service under Diana's watchful eye, managed to slip me a note that simply read, "Harold has everything prepared. Trust the process." Diana, meanwhile, made sure I overheard her discussing my future role in the family with several board members. "Eleanor has her little nonprofit work, which Thomas indulged because he felt guilty about her mother," she said loudly enough for me to hear from several feet away. "But the business requires experienced leadership, which thankfully Justin is ready to provide." The meeting with Harold Fitzgerald, my father's attorney for over 20 years, was scheduled for the following Thursday at 10 a.m. sharp. Diana made a point of telling me not to be late, adding with a thin smile, "Though I suppose punctuality will not matter much for you after the reading." The days leading up to the will reading were filled with anxiety. Michael helped me prepare for various scenarios, including the worst case that Diana had somehow convinced Dad to cut me out entirely. Even if that happens, Michael assured me there could be legal grounds to contest, especially if there is evidence of undue influence during his illness. But let us not assume the worst yet. The day before the reading, I made one last visit to my childhood home, knowing it might be my final opportunity. Diana had made it clear that changes would be coming after the will was settled. The house I entered was barely recognizable as the home where I had grown up. Diana's extensive renovations had erased nearly every trace of our family history. My mother's garden, which Dad had lovingly maintained for years after her death, had been replaced with a structured landscape design that looked beautiful but sterile. Inside, the comfortable lived-in spaces had been transformed into a showplace that could have been featured in a luxury magazine, but contained no soul. I wandered through the rooms looking for any connection to my past. In what had once been my father's study, now converted to Diana's personal office, I noticed a small key in the back of a drawer that looked familiar. With a jolt, I realized it opened the hidden compartment in the library bookcase where Dad had always kept his most important personal items. Checking to ensure I was truly alone, I hurried to the library, finding the secret panel undisturbed behind a row of leather-bound classics that Diana had probably purchased by the foot for their decorative value rather than content. The key turned smoothly, revealing a space containing Dad's keepsake box. Inside were photographs of my mother that had disappeared from the house, her wedding ring letters they had written to each other during their courtship, and to my surprise, a sealed envelope with my name, written in Dad's distinctive handwriting. I quickly tucked it into my purse, hearing Diana's voice calling for the housekeeper from somewhere downstairs. As I was leaving, I ran into Martha, the new housekeeper, who had replaced our beloved Maria, but who had always been kind to me during my visits. "Miss Eleanor," she said quietly, checking over her shoulder, "I thought you should know. Mrs. Wilson had people over last night. They were celebrating something, drinking champagne in the study. I heard her say, 'Tomorrow it will all be official,' and something about finally getting what she deserves." "Thank you for telling me, Martha," I replied, pressing her hand gratefully. "Your father was a good man," she added. "He always asked about my children's schooling when Mrs. Wilson was not around. Not many employers care about such things." My last stop before the reading was coffee with Richard Taylor, who had texted asking to meet privately. "Eleanor," he said. Once we were seated in a quiet corner of the cafe. "I cannot tell you specifics because of confidentiality matters, but I want you to know that your father was much more perceptive than Diana gave him credit for. Even before his diagnosis, he noticed things changing." "What kind of things?" I asked. Richard smiled mysteriously. Just wait and see the full picture tomorrow. And whatever happens, remember that your father loved you more than anything in this world. The next morning, I arrived at the law offices of Fitzgerald and Associates 15 minutes early, my stomach in knots despite Michael's reassuring presence beside me. The elegant waiting room was already occupied by Diana and Justin, both dressed in formal black, as if they were attending a second funeral. Diana barely acknowledged my presence with a cold nod, before turning back to her whispered conversation with Justin. As other attendees arrived, including Richard Taylor Grace and several other executives and friends, Diana made a point of greeting each of them warmly, playing the role of grieving widow to perfection. Just before we were called into Harold's office, Diana brushed past me, leaning in to whisper, "Prepare to say goodbye to everything, Eleanor. Your free ride is over." Harold Fitzgerald's office was exactly what you would expect from a man who had spent 40 years practicing law at the highest levels: wood-paneled walls, lined with leather-bound legal tomes, a massive mahogany desk that had probably witnessed thousands of life-altering decisions, and a conference table large enough to accommodate our entire group comfortably. Harold himself, a distinguished man in his late 60s, with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes, greeted each of us with solemn handshakes before taking his place at the head of the table. His assistant distributed water and arranged notepads with the firm's letterhead before quietly exiting, closing the heavy door behind her. "Thank you all for coming today," Harold began, his deep voice commanding immediate attention. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Thomas James Wilson and to review the disposition of his assets according to his expressed wishes." He opened a thick folder and began with formalities confirming the death certificate and his authority as executor. Diana tapped her manicured nails impatiently on the tabletop, drawing a sharp glance from Harold before he continued. "Before addressing the major bequests, Thomas requested that I handle several smaller matters," Harold said, proceeding to read a list of personal items and modest financial gifts to longtime employees and friends. Mrs. Chen, our former housekeeper, who had been dismissed by Diana, would receive $20,000, and Dad's collection of first-edition mystery novels they had often discussed. Frank Rodriguez inherited Dad's vintage fishing gear and their shared cabin on Lake Michigan. Grace was gifted a generous retirement package and Dad's first company computer preserved from the early days of Wilson Securities. With each bequest, Diana's expression darkened. When Harold announced that Dad had established college funds for the children of several employees, including Martha's kids, Diana could no longer contain herself. "Is all this really necessary, Harold?" she interrupted sharply. "These trinkets and sentimental gestures could have been handled separately. We are here for the important matters." Harold regarded her coolly over his reading glasses. "Mrs. Wilson, your husband was quite specific about the order in which his wishes should be revealed. If you would prefer not to participate in the entire proceeding, you are welcome to wait outside until we reach the portions that interest you." Richard Taylor suppressed a smile as Diana settled back in her chair, fuming silently. After completing the minor bequests, Harold cleared his throat and prepared to continue, but Diana suddenly stood up, unable to contain herself any longer. "Let me save everyone time," she announced, her voice ringing with triumph. "I know what comes next, and so does Eleanor. Thomas changed his will during his illness. She gets nothing." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. All eyes moved between Diana's smug face and my pale one. "I have the documentation right here," Diana continued, retrieving papers from her designer handbag. "My attorney helped Thomas revise everything 3 months ago. He realized who truly cared for him in the end." She cast a venomous glance my way. "She gets nothing, I made. Sure of it." To everyone's shock, Harold responded with a chuckle that quickly developed into full, genuine laughter. The sound was so unexpected in the somber setting that several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Diana's expression faltered. "What is so amusing, Harold? These are legal documents." Composing himself with visible effort, Harold removed his glasses and regarded Diana with something approaching pity. "Mrs. Wilson," he said calmly, "I do not doubt that you have documents. What I find amusing is your fundamental misunderstanding of your husband's estate planning. You see, those papers, whatever they may be, are essentially meaningless." "What are you talking about?" Diana demanded, her voice rising. "Thomas signed them himself. I watched him." "I am sure he did," Harold replied. "But perhaps you should have paid more attention during your conversations about asset protection over the years. You see, Thomas established an irrevocable trust for Eleanor last year. To put it simply, Mrs. Wilson, you cannot change a trust that already transferred $50 million last year." Diana's face went white. "That is impossible. I would have known." "Would you?" Harold asked mildly. "You signed the paperwork yourself, though I suspect you did not read it carefully. It was included in that stack of year-end tax documents you were in such a hurry to complete before your spa weekend in Scottsdale." My mind flashed back to a meeting with Dad about 14 months ago. He had mentioned taking care of some paperwork and making sure everything was protected, but I had assumed he was talking about standard business matters. Harold continued, his voice taking on a more formal tone. "Thomas Wilson created a comprehensive estate plan that included multiple trusts and legal structures. The Eleanor Wilson Education Trust was funded last year with $50 million and a 30% ownership stake in Wilson Securities. It is completely irrevocable and outside the scope of any subsequent will changes." Diana sank back into her chair, her complexion ashen. "He cannot have done this, not without telling me." "I assure you he did," Harold replied. "Furthermore, Thomas left extensive documentation regarding his concerns about your behavior during the marriage, and particularly during his illness." Harold nodded to his assistant, who had quietly re-entered the room, and she set up a laptop and projector. "Thomas recorded this message 6 months ago, shortly after his initial diagnosis, but before his cognitive abilities were impacted. He asked that it be played only in these specific circumstances." The screen flickered to life, showing my father sitting in this very office, looking tired but clear-eyed and determined. "If you are watching this," Dad began, "then Diana has attempted to alter my wishes after my death, as I suspected she might. I want to be clear that any changes to my will made after September of last year should be considered suspect and potentially executed under duress." Dad looked directly into the camera. "Diana, I know about your meetings with Stanley Griggs, your attempts to access my private banking information, and the conversations you have had with Justin about taking control of the company when the time comes. I know about your previous marriages and the sealed court records from your divorce from Lawrence Blackwell that you thought were permanently buried." Diana gasped audibly as Dad continued. "Eleanor, I am sorry for the pain Diana has caused you. I realized too late the true nature of our relationship, but I have done everything in my power to protect you and the company I built. Trust Harold to guide you through the rest." The video ended, leaving the room in stunned silence until Harold spoke again. In addition to this testimony, Thomas commissioned a forensic accounting investigation that uncovered numerous financial irregularities, including attempts to divert company funds into private accounts controlled by Diana and Justin. This evidence has been forwarded to the appropriate authorities. Diana jumped to her feet. "This is slander. I will sue this firm and all of you personally. Those recordings could be faked. You have no proof of anything." "Actually," Harold said calmly, "we have extensive proof, including documentation of the $3 million you transferred from Thomas's personal accounts to your sister in Arizona, whom you claimed did not exist when Thomas asked about Perfau. Your family." Justin, who had been sitting silently throughout this exchange, looked shocked. "Mom, you told me that money came from your savings from before the marriage." Diana ignored him, turning her fury toward me. "This is your doing, you manipulative little brat. You turned him against me." Harold raised his voice for the first time. "Mrs. Wilson, control yourself, or I will have you removed. We have significant business yet to conduct." Over the next hour, Harold methodically outlined the full extent of my father's estate plan. Diana would retain the house, and a modest monthly allowance contingent on her dropping any legal challenges. Justin received a 5% stake in the company, and would be allowed to maintain his current position reporting to the board, rather than having autonomous authority. The most surprising revelation came last. Dad had restructured the majority ownership of Wilson Securities into the newly created Wilson Foundation, dedicated to providing technology education to underprivileged students. And he had named me as the foundation's head, with a controlling interest in the company, through the foundation's holdings. Thomas believed that wealth carried responsibility, Harold explained. He structured his legacy to continue the values he lived by protecting both his daughter and his life's work, while ensuring that both would contribute to the greater good. Diana sat in stunned silence, the full magnitude of her defeat apparently sinking in. Justin looked torn between shock at his mother's actions and relief that he had not been completely disinherited. As for me, I felt an overwhelming mixture of grief and gratitude. Even in death, Dad had found a way to protect me and remain true to the principles that had guided his life. The aftermath of the will reading was chaotic. Diana stormed out of Harold's office, nearly knocking over his assistant in her haste to escape the humiliation of her exposed schemes. Justin hesitated, clearly torn between following his mother and staying to understand the full implications of the revelations. After a moment's indecision, he mumbled an awkward apology to the room in general and hurried after Diana. Once they had gone, the atmosphere in the room perceptibly lightened. Richard Taylor crossed to shake my hand, his eyes twinkling with satisfaction. Thomas would be proud of how you handled yourself today, Eleanor. Dignity under pressure was always one of his core values. Harold dismissed the remaining attendees with promises to be in touch about their specific bequests, then asked me and Michael to stay behind. Once we were alone, he visibly relaxed, removing his tie and pouring 3 glasses of what looked like very expensive scotch from a crystal decanter. "Your father loved this particular Macallan," he said, handing me a glass. "We shared a drink from this same bottle when he finalized the trust for you. He wanted to tell you about it immediately, but we agreed it would be safer if Diana believed she still had options. Thomas suspected she might take more drastic actions if she felt completely cornered." "When did he start suspecting her?" I asked, trying to process everything that had happened. Harold's expression turned somber. "About 18 months ago. He noticed small discrepancies in accounts meetings being scheduled that he had no recollection of agreeing to, and, of course, the increasing isolation from you and his old friends. The final confirmation came when he accidentally overheard Diana on the phone with Justin discussing how they would streamline the company once Thomas was out of the picture. That was before his diagnosis," I said, the timeline suddenly becoming clear. "Yes. In fact, Thomas suspected his subsequent illness might not have been entirely coincidental, though we could never prove anything definitively. After that phone conversation, he began putting safeguards in place. The trust for you was just one component of a comprehensive plan to protect both you and his legacy." Harold handed me a sealed envelope. "This contains access information for your father's private digital vault." He maintained detailed records of everything, including evidence of Diana's attempts to access accounts, conversations he recorded, and his own medical records. He wanted you to have all of it. I clutched the envelope, feeling both the weight of responsibility and the comfort of my father's foresight. What happens now? "Legally, Diana has few options," Harold explained. "The trusts are ironclad, and challenging them would only expose her further. My guess is she will take the house and allowance, rather than risk criminal charges, though that decision may ultimately not be hers if the financial investigation proceeds to prosecution." After leaving Harold's office with Michael, I felt a strange compulsion to return to the family home one last time. "I need to collect some personal items," I explained. Though, in truth, I needed to see Diana's reaction firsthand to confront the woman who had caused so much pain. Michael insisted on accompanying me. "You should not face this alone," he said, his concern evident. Diana has nothing left to lose. We arrived to find the front door unlocked, and the sound of destruction coming from my father's study. Following the noise, we discovered Diana systematically destroying documents, photographs, and mementos, a half-empty bottle of vodka on the desk beside her. She whirled around when she heard us enter, her carefully maintained facade completely shattered. Her makeup was smeared, her designer outfit disheveled, and her eyes wild with fury and alcohol. "Come to gloat," she snarled, throwing a crystal paperweight that had been a gift from Richard on Dad's 50th birthday. It missed me by inches, shattering against the doorframe. "Happy now that you have taken everything." "I did not take anything, Diana," I replied, maintaining a calm I did not entirely feel. Dad protected what was his. What was ours? "Yours," she laughed bitterly. "You were never here, off playing savior to underprivileged children while I took care of everything. Do you have any idea how tedious it was pretending to care about your father's boring stories and business obsessions for 7 years? If it was so terrible, why did you stay?" I asked, genuinely curious, despite my anger. "For the money, obviously," she shouted, gesturing wildly around the opulent room. "Do you think I married a man 20 years older than me for stimulating conversation? I earned every penny putting up with his devoted daddy routine and constant reminiscing about your precious mother." The naked contempt in her voice was shocking, even knowing what I now did about her true nature. "You never loved him at all," I said quietly. "Love," Diana spat the word, like it tasted foul. "Love is for greeting cards and people who cannot afford real power. I respected your father's business acumen, but love, please." The door opened behind us, and Justin appeared, his face registering shock at the destruction and his mother's condition. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically firm. Diana's expression transformed instantly, vulnerability, replacing rage as she turned to her son. "Justin, darling, they have taken everything from us. They have turned your father against us with their lies." Justin shook his head slowly. "Stop it, Mom. I heard the recordings. I saw the bank statements Harold showed me after you left. This was never going to work." "Of course it would have worked." Diana snapped, the mask slipping again. "It was perfect, until that interfering old lawyer produced those documents Thomas hid from me." Justin looked at me, genuine regret in his eyes. "I did not know the extent of what she was planning, Eleanor. I swear. I thought we were just positioning for better roles in the company. I never wanted to steal your inheritance." "Perhaps you should have asked more questions," I replied, not ready to absolve him completely. Diana launched into a tirade, alternating between blaming me, Harold, and even my father for her predicament. As her rant continued, growing increasingly incoherent, I felt a strange sense of pity replacing my anger. This woman had spent years orchestrating an elaborate deception and manipulation, all for wealth she could never enjoy, because she was incapable of genuine connection. "Diana," I interrupted her mid-sentence, "you can leave with your dignity intact, or make this worse for yourself. Dad left you the house and a generous allowance. Take it and go build a new life somewhere else." "How dare you offer me crumbs from my own table?" she hissed. "It was never your table," I replied firmly. "You were just a guest who overstayed her welcome." Her hand rose as if to strike me, but Justin caught her wrist. "Enough, Mom. It is over." Before Diana could respond, the doorbell rang. Michael went to answer it, returning moments later, with Harold and 2 serious-looking men in suits. "Mrs. Wilson," Harold said formally, "these gentlemen are from the Financial Crimes Division. They have some questions about certain transactions from Thomas Wilson's accounts. I suggest you answer them truthfully." Diana seemed to deflate before our eyes, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. "This is not over," she muttered, as she was led from the room. "You have not heard the last from me." But in her eyes, I could see the knowledge that it was indeed over. Her carefully constructed world had collapsed completely, leaving nothing but consequences. Justin lingered after Diana was taken to the living room for questioning. I know it does not mean much now, but I am sorry, Eleanor. For what it is worth, I think your dad was pretty amazing. The way he built the company, the way he protected it, and you, even when we thought he was too sick to function." He hesitated, then added, "I would like to earn my place at Wilson Securities if you will give me the chance. No special treatment, just an opportunity to learn the business the right way." I studied him, seeing, perhaps for the first time, that he too had been manipulated by Diana, though not as completely as my father. "We will see, Justin. That will depend on the investigation and what you knew about your mother's actions." After everyone had left, I stood alone in my father's study, surveying the damage Diana had wrought in her final rage. Among the scattered papers and broken glass, I found an old photograph of Dad and me at the lake house fishing off the dock at sunrise. I was perhaps 10 years old, and we were both laughing as I held up a tiny sunfish like it was a record-breaking catch. I carefully tucked the photo into my purse, alongside the letter Dad had left me, feeling his presence in the room despite everything that had happened. For the first time since his death, I allowed myself to truly grieve, not just for the father I had lost, but for the years Diana had stolen from us. That night I slept in my childhood bedroom, now stripped of personality, but still somehow mine. In the morning, I would begin the enormous task of stabilizing the company, establishing the foundation, and creating a legacy worthy of Thomas Wilson. But for that night, I was simply a daughter, saying goodbye to her father, finding closure in the knowledge that he had loved me enough to protect me even after he was gone. 6 months passed in a blur of activity. The Wilson Foundation was officially established with an initial endowment of $80 million and a mission to provide technology, education, and resources to underprivileged students across the country. Our first 10 grants went to schools in economically disadvantaged areas, providing not just computers and internet access, but comprehensive teacher training and curriculum development. I settled into my role as Foundation Director, with a mixture of trepidation and determination. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but each time I visited a classroom where children were coding for the first time or building their own websites, I felt Dad's approval like a tangible presence. Wilson Securities stabilized after a brief period of uncertainty following the revelations about Diana. Richard Taylor temporarily came out of semi-retirement to help manage the transition, and, with his guidance, we restructured the executive team based on merit and contribution rather than politics. My personal healing was slower and more complicated. Dr. Elizabeth Parker, a grief counselor recommended by Michael, helped me navigate the complex emotions of losing Dad while simultaneously dealing with the betrayal by Diana and the radical changes in my life circumstances. "Grief is never linear, Doctor," Parker reminded me during one particularly difficult session. "Add in betrayal and sudden responsibility, and you have got a perfect emotional storm. Be patient with yourself." Surprisingly, Justin and I developed a cautious but genuine relationship during this period. After being cleared of direct involvement in Diana's financial schemes, though admitting he had suspected some impropriety, Justin requested a demotion to product development, where his natural charisma could be an asset rather than a liability. "I want to earn my way up," he explained during a lunch meeting. "Diana always taught me to take shortcuts to focus on appearances. I want to learn the substance behind the facade." Diana herself faced both legal and personal consequences for her actions. The financial crimes investigation revealed even more extensive fraud than Harold had initially discovered, including identity theft and tax evasion, dating back to before her marriage to my father. She eventually accepted a plea deal that included restitution, community service, and probation, rather than prison time, largely due to my decision not to push for maximum charges. "Why show her any mercy after what she did?" Natalie asked when I explained my decision. "It is not about mercy for Diana," I replied. "It is about peace for me. I do not want to spend years consumed by court cases and vengeance. Dad protected what mattered. The rest is just stuff." 3 months after her sentencing, I received a request from Diana for a meeting. Against Michael's advice, I agreed to see her once at the halfway house, where she was serving part of her community service requirement. The woman who greeted me bore little resemblance to the polished, confident Diana who had dominated our family for years. Without her designer clothes, professional makeup, and the power she had wielded so carelessly, she seemed smaller, older, almost ordinary. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "I did not think you would." "I almost did not," I admitted. "Why did you want to see me?" Diana looked down at her hands, the manicure grown out, the designer rings gone. "I wanted to ask for your forgiveness," she said finally, "though I know I do not deserve it." I studied her face, searching for the manipulation that had been her hallmark. "Are you genuinely sorry for what you did to my father? To me? Or just sorry you got caught?" A flash of the old Diana surfaced briefly in her eyes before she sighed. "Both, probably. I am trying to sort that out myself. The counselor here says I have narcissistic personality traits and attachment disorders from my childhood. Not an excuse, just context." "I cannot forgive you today," I told her honestly. "Maybe never completely. But I will not hold on to hatred either. That would only give you power. You do not deserve to have any more." She nodded, accepting this answer with surprising grace. As I stood to leave, she asked one final question. "Was he really suspicious for that long? Before the illness?" "Yes," I said simply. "Dad saw through people. It just took him longer with you because he wanted so badly to believe." In the months that followed, I found myself increasingly grateful for Michael's steady presence. His legal expertise had been invaluable during the transition, but it was his emotional support that truly sustained me. On the anniversary of Dad's death, he accompanied me to the lakeside memorial garden, where we had scattered his ashes, standing quietly beside me as I placed wildflowers by the simple stone marker. "He would be so proud of you," Michael said, as we walked along the shore afterward. "Not just for handling the business and legal complexities, but for how you have kept your compassion through all of this." "I had a good teacher," I replied, thinking of Dad's unfailing kindness even to people who had not deserved it. He always said that wealth was just a tool, not a purpose. The purpose was making a positive difference. The Wilson family home, which legally belonged to me after Diana's conviction, voided her claim to it, underwent a transformation of its own. I removed Diana's cold showplace decorations and restored the warmth and character that had defined our home during my childhood. My mother's reading nook returned, along with family photographs and comfortable furniture that invited people to actually live in the space, not just admire it. Grace came out of retirement to help me establish the foundation offices, bringing her organizational skills and institutional knowledge that proved invaluable. "Your father always said you had the heart for this work," she told me one afternoon, as we reviewed applications for our second round of grants. "He knew exactly what he was doing when he structured things this way." Justin found his own path developing a cybersecurity education program that eventually became one of the Foundation's most successful initiatives. "I want to build something, not just inherit it," he explained when he presented the proposal. "Diana taught me to take. Thomas showed me even briefly how to give. I am trying to follow the better example." As for me, I gradually found a balance between honoring Dad's legacy and creating my own. The Foundation's work expanded beyond technology education to include entrepreneurship programs for at-risk youth and innovation grants for teachers developing new approaches to STEM education. Each new initiative reflected Dad's values while incorporating my own vision for making education truly accessible to everyone. The most meaningful moment came when we launched the Thomas Wilson Scholarship, providing full university tuition to promising students from backgrounds similar to Dad's own humble beginnings. At the inaugural award ceremony, I shared the story of how Dad had built his business from nothing, emphasizing that his greatest legacy was not the wealth he created, but the values he lived by. "My father taught me that true wealth is measured not by what you have, but by what you give." I told the audience of students, parents, and educators. Money can be gained and lost, but integrity, compassion, and determination leave a lasting impact that transcends financial statements. Later that evening, alone in Dad's study, now my own workspace, I finally opened the letter he had left in the hidden compartment. His familiar handwriting brought tears to my eyes before I had read a single word. "My dearest Eleanor Bear," he had written. "If you are reading this, then you have discovered the truth about Diana and navigated the storm that likely followed. I am sorry I could not protect you from this pain, but I am confident in your strength and resilience. Remember that wealth, while useful, cannot buy what truly matters: integrity, purpose, and love. These are your true inheritance, the values your mother and I tried to instill in you. Live by them and you will never go wrong. I love you more than words can express, and I am prouder of you than you will ever know. Always your dad." The letter confirmed what I had come to understand through this entire journey. Dad's greatest gift had never been financial security, but the unshakable foundation of values he had built within me. Diana had coveted his money, but had never understood the true source of his success, the authentic connections he formed, and the positive impact he created wherever he went. I realized that forgiveness, even for someone like Diana, was not about excusing their actions, but about freeing myself from the burden of hatred. By protecting me legally and financially, Dad had given me the freedom to choose compassion without vulnerability, strength without bitterness. Looking back now, I can see that this painful chapter taught me lessons I might never have learned otherwise. I learned to trust actions over words, to value authenticity over appearance, and to recognize that planning and foresight are expressions of love just as powerful as any emotional declaration. Most importantly, I learned that love transcends death and betrayal. Dad's love continued to protect and guide me, even when he was gone. His voice still whispers in my ear when I face difficult decisions. His example still shapes how I move through the world. Have you ever had someone try to come between you and someone you love? What did you do? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that love and integrity always win in the end. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, the most valuable inheritance is not what we receive, but what we pass on to others.